Hello. Thank you for joining me. This is the first episode of Regulatory Voices. Regulatory Voices is a community dedicated to sharing knowledge, experiences, and perspectives from across regulatory affairs in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. The inspiration for this page is based on a common complaint that I had over the years, which is that LinkedIn is no longer a knowledge sharing platform. And through interviews, discussions, and roundtables and reports, Regulatory Voices looks into the realities of regulatory across drug development and leadership in people's own words, and to make this a place where people can learn and engage. So on this platform, we'll be engaging with people at every stage of their career from different aspects of the industry, from people at the beginning to experience all the way up to C-suite in both pharma and biotech. The regulatory community has been built on collaboration, knowledge sharing, and mentorship from the very beginning, and we're aiming to add our little path to that. In today's topics, we'll be talking about career pathways into regulatory, what is regulatory intelligence, drug development data, data sharing, RWE and AI and regulatory strategy. Joining me today is Huong. I've known Huong for many years now, and it's great to have you on the show. If you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your journey so far, and then we'll go into the questions.
This is great. This is exciting. Thank you, Connor, for this invitation to join you here. My name is Huong Huynh. I am Director of Regulatory Science at the Critical Path Institute. Critical Path Institute is a nonprofit organization that works in the space of drug development and collaboration. So I describe myself as a creative scientist. I have a creative, crafty side, kind of balances the scientific, technical side. And at Critical Path here, I mediate communication with regulatory authorities, how we communicate with them in terms of what are the next needs, where the research is going, in order to establish tools that can then be used to help design better clinical studies and also to analyze data coming from clinical studies. So the work that we do is in the background to support the market authorization as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. One thing I think we should start with is on the career pathways in regulatory. One thing we spoke about many times is the role that networking has played in your career and how that's helped you go from one role to the next. And it's also something that you've consciously tried to get better at as you've gone throughout your career. You've also got a unique blend of working across government, industry, and non-profit, which gives you a bit of a unique perspective into some of the journeys and how they all interact together. So if you could start with, how you actually got into regulatory in the first place, it'd be great to hear that story.
So I would consider so when I started after getting my PhD in the postdoc, I did the normal research that was required. I thought I was going to go to become a professor at a 4-year university, but the path changed. New opportunities arrived. And a colleague of mine from grad school actually talked to me several times to say that the division at his division at the FDA was expanding. And they were particularly looking for someone with a pharmacology background. So we worked that through, and it was through networking that I kept in contact with him over a number of years after each of us had graduated, that he approached me. He remembered me and my skills, that I would be a good fit into the division at FDA. So that was my start, knowing somebody who gave me the opportunity and helped me navigate the government job puzzle, got me into regulatory as a reviewer of submissions. So that was my stunt. So that was 10 years of it. And then again, networking helped me move from FDA to Critical Path Institute. So again, it was who I know, who knew I was looking for a different opportunity, and the recruiter. I happen to know the recruiter from my days from postdoctoral training. So again, it's who you know and how you maintain that relationship that can help you in the future. You never know what's going to show up.
Okay. And then to follow on from that, what is it initially about regulatory, the regulatory field in general, that appealed to you as opposed to other scientific career paths? Obviously, you had your degree, and so you could have gone in a few different areas. What drew you actually into regulatory?
So to me, I have this Venn diagram where there are 3 different areas that I felt that regulatory affairs was a good blend. One was the law and the policy. How do you interpret the regulations and keep the drug products safe, or any medical products safe. The law and the policy was one angle. The research and the science, I'm still a scientist, so I'm still curious about what's coming up about the research angle. What are the new scientific developments, new technologies that are being developed that can move us forward? And then third is the communication and education aspect. Education is important to me in terms of me giving back to the community that has helped me along the way. So sharing what I know now, what I wish I had known then. So between the three of those items, it all kind of blends into regulatory affairs for me. So that's where my motivation and the path is kept.
Perfect. Touching upon obviously that journey into the FDA, obviously it's a public body and it's a public service role. It's not exactly as lucrative as going straight into industry and working in a sponsor company. And you were there for 11 years, so that's a good stint at the agency. What is it about working the FDA at the start that was motivating for you, and what kept you there for so long? And if you could contextualize that with what experience did that give you that you couldn't have gained elsewhere as well?
Certainly, certainly. So I think there's a certain mentality for those who go into public service. And for me, it was public health, giving back to the public. I'm not a physician. I don't cure people, but from my days of volunteering at the hospital, it's that sense of contributing to the larger picture and helping the population and my community stay safe. So that aspect of being a public service has been grounded into me early on with my volunteer work. So that aspect kept me going at FDA, and to see the different ways that FDA employees contribute and help support public safety and public health. So what kept me there for so long? One, it's the teamwork, the dynamics, the collaboration. Yes, there are teamwork and collaboration in other spaces too, but to have the support system of those who understand the challenges of interpreting regulations and law, and the excitement of putting a law into effect. I was there when the generic drug user fee was enacted in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And to see how everybody came together to put that in motion, to make it happen. Yes, it's not going to be in 2 months, but over time, the leadership was there. The training was there to bring us all along. So it's traveling on the train together. And we all had that same common goal for public health.
Brilliant. It's always interesting speaking to people who have worked at the FDA and made the transition as well. And what you said there about the mentality and the type reasons to go into public health, they're fairly consistent across the boards. As you said, it's public service is a bit of a calling. It's not for everybody. There is something definitely to the person, and they're quite putting a lot of passion to it. So it's always good hearing those stories, especially hearing someone who did so long there. And obviously, we talked about how you transitioned out of that and you went into industry, and how networking definitely helped you do that. How important would you say networking is, especially today in regulatory careers? Obviously, 'cause it's been around as an idea and as a something to do for many years, but I feel like in today's current market economy in life sciences, it's taken on increasing importance.
Yes, I think for regulatory affairs professional, relationship building is key. One, of course, networking. You always want to go out and meet new people. Some may be collaborators in the future, might not have a project right now. And especially in regulatory affairs, we may not be the owner of the project. We have to work with chemists. We have to work with marketing. So it's important to build that relationship so that when there is a request from regulatory authority, we want to have the key experts there to give us a response. And we would certainly like for them to give us a response in the time that we need it. So having that relationship built already on trust and mutual respect of boundaries and time, I think that's important. So networking externally is important, but also internally within your organization so that you can get things done.
And I suppose a follow on from that is if you look at regulatory affairs as a function now versus what people tell me it was like 20 years ago, it's changed a lot
Mm.
in terms of how it's viewed, how it functions, and what it does day to day. The common theme I hear people say is that they fell into regulatory, or that someone suggested and it worked out for them. Increasingly, we have more people who are starting in regulatory very early on, as in their first opportunity, or we have people who are early career, kind of like where you were yourself, or people who could be PhDs or PharmDs, etc., who want to get into regulatory but don't know where to start.
Hmm. Hmm.
What would you tell to them to do now? What's the best way for them to try and make that transition, especially in today's market where it's becoming not as easy to get into that entry level role?
Right. I think actually today, from what I see and from what I hear, it's not that different from 15 years ago, from before I got started. So, what I would advise is to keep an open mind. One is that regulatory affairs is a trajectory, right? So, I don't think it's reasonable for somebody coming out from a degree to jump in right away. There is a possibility that you could be let's say, a regulatory associate. Again, talk and meet with people who have such positions available. Not everybody does. But a lot of times too, if you're coming from a science background, yes, you want to go into regulatory, but I think the more important thing is to have an understanding of how industry functions. It's quite different from academia. So use your skills as a scientist, come in as a scientist perhaps, and then from the R&D, learn how industry pharmaceuticals are using R&D, how important that is, and the role that R&D plays in the submission. And that way you can learn all the regulatory components along the way. And lo and behold, you network it within the organization, and somebody may have an opportunity for an associate level for regulatory affairs. And they think, "Oh, that person, you have an interest and you're already here inside the company. So maybe give that person a chance or even shadow and volunteer to help out." So that actually happened to one of my friends. Know that can happen.
Good. I think it's nice to hear that there is no cookie cutter way of just breaking into regulatory. Sometimes the bit of the old way still works as well, and I think people who find themselves making that transition into it and they're having a baseline in something else and a real strong understanding kind of gives them not a stronger start per se as someone who could come straight out of university in a associate role, but may give them a better understanding, as you say, of the functions and how everyone interacts together. Because the difference from academia to industry is quite different. Uh,
Yes.
so I'd like to go on to the next topic, which is what is regulatory intelligence? It's something that I see pop up here and there, and it's not something you see too much as a title, but you see it as something where people want to have it incorporated into their regulatory team.
Hmm.
As someone where this is their bread and butter, and it's something you feel quite strong about, could you actually just explain to us what regulatory intelligence is and how it actually is used in broader strategy and is not just how it's not just a common job title description?
Certainly, happy to. So, to me, the way I see and use regulatory intelligence is really landscape analysis, trying to see, constantly looking at the current landscape. What are new methodologies being developed? Who's developing them? Who has products and assets in that area? And who's close to having a pipeline that could be going forward as a market application? So, understanding what the new technologies are, what the new methodologies are, because for us, it's important to know what solutions are available to help drug development. And it's not only operating and designing and conducting clinical trials, it's how to find the patients to enroll in your trials. So those kind of background, pre-research, you have to do to figure out who's in that space, who are your competitors, can they become your collaborators, and who's in that space that have the patient population that you're looking for. So again, a lot of landscape analysis, investigation, searching for what's new and what's out there, and then pulling that in to see how that works with my organization and the projects that we have going on. So understanding the projects that are going on internally and then what's going on externally and how you can bring things together to support the organization.
Okay. And so obviously the one thing that comes out for me from that is it kind of can be important and used and utilized in all different aspects of development. So I suppose my follow-up would be, how early do you start to use regulatory intelligence, start influencing decisions in the development process?
I see it used very early into the R&D because
Okay.
you want to be able to design for us at Critical Path, we want to design a program and to do the research that actually addresses an unmet need. If somebody's already working on that area, is it something that we can collaborate with them? Add number and powers, right? Is it something that they have the data and we have part of the data? So can we share and collaborate? So early on, so that we don't duplicate, but we work together. So again, it's relationship building, understanding what the needs are from the patient and the population. What are the hurdles, regulatory wise, development wise, and how can we work together? So that's where regulatory intelligence is important to see who are the players and where they are at the same time.
Perfect. And you mentioned a little bit about the work you're doing at Critical Path a few times throughout the discussion so far. And we've talked a bit about your role and what it does and how you work with companies. And something that you said you were quite interested in discussing was the growing importance of data in drug development, particularly in clinical trial data, real world evidence, AI analysis, and particularly shared data repositories.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you've been involved in some initiatives focusing on rare disease data sharing as well. So
Mhm.
looking at the value of data sharing in drug development, we're generating enormous amounts of data from clinical trials, non-clinical studies, electronic health records, and patient registries. So from your perspective, what are we currently doing well and what are we not doing well when it comes to using that data?
I think I see the growing acceptance that data is important.
Hmm.
Patient data is precious. And certainly you want to acknowledge that you don't want to burden the patient by repeatedly going into trials and doing pretty much the same thing, right? Taking medication, giving blood samples. So how can we learn from the data and the information and the trials that we have already had? Are there information in the control arm that can be shared? Yes, I understand the proprietary of the treatment arm for that specific project. Pharmaceutical company can hang on to that. But the control arm, can we get a better understanding of what is the natural progression of the disease? How is the control arm data? Can those be pooled so they can become a larger control for external control example per se, especially in rare disease? You don't have a lot of patients to enroll and they're not geographically convenient to enroll. So when we talk about sharing of data, it's important to understand the learnings from studies that ended in futility or that failed or did not meet their endpoints. But it's also important to share and understand the registries from patient advocacy groups so that we can have the pre-competitive collaboration. Again, collaboration is very important so that whoever has the trial data, registry data, even basic science, basic research can help us understand the natural progression of the disease. What happens if there is no intervention? As long as we can understand that in the disease, then there are opportunities where we can go in and dive deeper and say, what if we interfere with this signaling pathway? What if we help the patient mitigate symptoms? You know, we might not be at the cure yet, but if we can improve the quality of life for the patient, how helpful can that be? And another thing that I've been seeing more of and more discussion of is the consent from the patients and in the consent form of clinical trials for having their data used as secondary research. So it's not only for that trial that they're using, so that if there is a consent for secondary use of the data, that would help a lot in terms of collaborative entities like Critical Path Institute to then aggregate multiple sources of data.
Hmm. You mentioned the rare disease part there, and over the years I've done a lot with companies in fast track designation or orphan designation. We're talking about really limited patient pools, and I suppose from everything you said there about some of these trials don't work out, but there's data there. So why in particular is data sharing really important for rare disease development?
So with rare diseases, one, there's challenges in identifying and diagnosing the patients. There could be delay in diagnosis because one, you don't know what you're looking for. Two, they may look like something else. For example, for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, it's a pulmonary condition, but it's often mistaken as asthma or COPD. Maybe because the clinician doesn't have the tool to identify alpha-1 antitrypsin versus asthma. And so the symptoms are very similar. So there's a delay in diagnosing the alpha-1 patients. So what we're doing now is we've started a consortium that works with the alpha-1 patient advocacies, the pharmaceutical companies that have assets in their pipeline to treat this condition, as well as researchers and the patients themselves to get an understanding of how we can help them live, function, and survive with the disease so that can we help them manage their symptoms, or can we come up with some set of questionnaires, assessments that clinicians can use to identify alpha-1 patients versus COPD patients? What are the differences and what are some markers and indicators that we can work on? So that's where working in rare disease and collaboration is important, and sharing the data and the knowledge of the disease, not just clinical data, but the knowledge of the disease, hearing it from the patients, really how they are surviving with that condition can help.
Okay. And then following up from that, you talked a bit about the data repository side and some of the nonprofits, and sometimes these rare disease areas have small groups around them where it could be families who have come together to make something and try and research it together. So something I wanted to look into a bit more was the role that non-profit data repositories play in helping share information across stakeholders.
So one of the projects that we have was in collaboration with the FDA to establish a data and analytics platform specifically for rare diseases, such that data shared on that platform can be interrogated and researched to accelerate potential therapies. So with this data and analytics platform, what happens is that we have multiple sources, whether it's trial data, electronic health data from hospitals, claims data, real world data from clinicians and hospitals as well, and as well as patient registries that are shared from patient advocacy groups. All of that different type of data can come in and sit on the platform. And our team of data scientists and data engineers curate that information so that it's interoperable. Doesn't matter if you're getting the data from Pharma 1, Pharma 2, Pharma 3, as well as advocacy group 1, 2, or advocacy group A and B. All of the data is pooled together, de-identified, but they're standardized and curated such that they have the same terminologies and definitions so that anybody who's interested in doing research in that particular area, for example, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, can request access to the Duchenne database sets and interrogate that, knowing that there are multiple information, all standardized, all interoperable, all within HIPAA compliance and GDPR as well. So there's trust there in the data when it's shared to a nonprofit because we're neutral, a stake in where the data goes and how it's used.
I suppose the tricky bit is, and we talked about this before, is the proprietary nature of clinical data. To run these studies, particularly these phase 1s and phase 2s, a lot of investment goes into it, a lot of funding rounds. It takes a lot to actually produce these data sets. And I imagine that a big barrier for, say, sponsor companies is the reluctance to share a lot of that clinical data. So On your side, what are the biggest barriers preventing companies from sharing more information in today?
From my experience of what I've seen, I think there's timing and legal considerations. So while the scientists who participate in the consortium and the collaboration and the scientific discussions, we share the knowledge. Great. We're on board to share data. But then the legal team needs to be part of that because we need to have a data agreement before the data can be transferred. So that's where it can be tricky, where the timing for legal considerations to come in, the back and forth in negotiation, we like this, we don't like this, we want to add this. So that's where the tricky part is. It's the time it takes to get through the legal considerations before the data can be shared and everybody else is waiting to hear and see the data. And then also there are certain limitations in terms of our data team may not know the quality of the data until we get it. So sometimes the quality of the data is not as what we expected. So maybe a lot of cleanups to do or not quite the information we were hoping for. So those are kind of the two, not quite barriers, but speed bumps in the process.
Yeah. And you mentioned, there was I think a couple questions ago, the idea of sharing control arm data or a placebo arm as a potential compromise. Why could that actually be valuable?
Why would that actually be valuable? Because then we can see the trends of non-treatment. And then from there, some of the things that we do is from our data team to our quantitative medicines team, with the control arm, our quantitative medicine scientists can work to build a simulation model, a disease modeling tool that can be used with the control data, the control arm. And then once we can have that tool, that simulation tool validated and qualified by the regulators, it can then be used. And then pharmaceutical companies, developers can use that disease modeling tool in their own development program with their particular pipeline asset to see so that as long as we can build the model based on controls data, then it can be used and utilized in different treatments. But it's standardized. Again, having a way to use the standardized tool so that it's even across the board. Doesn't matter where your population is. Europe, Australia, Japan. It's a accepted tool that can be used. And even if it's not used in phase 3 for market application, using the tool can help inform decisions on the program, whether to go forward or not. So for example, we have clinical outcome assessment measures that are used to help enroll patients into a trial, certain questionnaires that are asked to over time to see how the patient is managing with their disease. So while this COA measure could be used in phase 1, phase 2, it at least informs for the sponsor which direction to go. What's the next step in their development program? So that's informative as well. That's an internal regulatory decision to the company that can be helpful. And that's where we feel the value is in developing tools like this.
I want to look a little bit at the real world evidence side. As we mentioned, that's something that Critical Path is actively engaging in and working with hospitals and registries. So, how can RWE from hospitals, registries, clinical practice help improve drug development programs?
So, again, by sharing this information and for making it available for interoperable data, we can help accelerate clinical trials by having enrichment biomarkers, understanding from the EHRs, the real world evidence, we can identify perhaps biomarkers that can help identify and get to an endpoint. And we can also help identify biomarkers that can be used to enrich the patient population going into a trial. So for inclusion exclusion criteria, we can do that. We can help by having this information, real world evidence. It kind of regenerates because the evidence that is used practically in pragmatic setting can help inform the study design of the next study coming up. It can also inform from the post-market data information what can be improved in the next round, second, third generation of a therapy that can be helped informed. And also, one of the things we are seeing more of now is that certain diseases have subgroups and subpopulations. There's a little bit of differences here and there, early Parkinson's versus late Parkinson's, early Huntington's versus late Huntington's. So if we use this information, real world evidence from hospitals, clinical settings, and understand how to demarcate early stage versus late, we can then develop tools that can help the patients with what they have. Early diagnosis for early stage, maybe intervention for early stage. At late stage, perhaps more on managing some symptoms. So having these information can help development programs in such a way that it can be specific for the population.
I think as well, there's a flip side to that where it might help the agency as well, the FDA and other organizations around the world, trying to understand patient populations, disease progression, and outcome measures. I should say. So, how would these regulators actually use this information to understand on their side?
I think the two important things is one, with post-marketing data, certainly keep up with the safety and efficacy of a product that's on the market. Does it warrant recall? And also for developers and as well as the agencies, really understanding the dosage. Was that appropriate? Is there, a need for having an intermediate dosage? And would it be needed to expand the labeling to include a new age range, perhaps, or include the new subgroup as well? So that is where, again, regulatory intelligence in terms of landscape analysis, what's going on with the data that's available, can help with real world evidence. That's where we can see it.
And on our last conversation, we spoke about the growing role of AI in general, in the general sense. But when we applied it to regulatory strategy and the work that you guys are doing now, you highlighted that AI can help make sense of a massive amount of data already available. So my question to you would be, how are you currently using AI and how are you seeing it used in regulatory intelligence and strategy?
So internally, we do have an AI platform that we could query based on our internal documentations. And that way we can go back 20 years of what CPATH has been doing, because many of us now were not here 15 years ago when the first tool was qualified. So we don't have that historical knowledge necessarily. So AI can help us sift through internal documents to get at the history and what sets the precedents. How did we engage with FDA 15 years ago? How has the agency changed? So how should we strategize and engage with agency now, for example? And then externally in the public area, I have been using several AI platforms that enable me to research publicly available documents from various agencies across the world to see what has been how has the regulatory decision been over years, and how are the regulatory decisions happening in different regions? So pediatrics, how are pediatrics regulations in Japan versus Europe? What are the limitations? What are the important guidance and guidelines? As well as, for example, what's the history of digital technology? How does the agency, for example, FDA, how has the agency historically been viewing digital images as data to support an application? From using these AI platforms, I can query and it will give me back results from the publicly available sources. So if I wanted to see a medical reviewer's review from the FDA, it can find that information and it can give me the link to that document because it's publicly available. So that's how I've been seeing AI platforms used and how I've been using it as well.
Okay. I suppose a big part of it as well is obviously trying to find the right AI that works for you and ensuring it has access to the data sets you need to give you the information you're looking for. I've experimented with different types of AIs for different purposes and different functions of my role. But can AI actually help identify things like companies developing drugs in a particular area, previous regulatory submissions, and looking for previous precedents set by agency like FDA and for other regulators? Can it actually do those things?
I think it can, but I don't think it'll be in one AI platform. So I have had access and used several different AIs, and I continue to use probably at least 4 to 5 different platforms at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So while some platform may be better at business intelligence, what company has what asset, and what company is um, in negotiation for a merger, a buyout, and such. That can be helpful in one platform, but to actually get to the submissions themselves from that company, I would need a different platform. So, but with a grain of salt too, that I have to double check and verify what the AI output is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'd have to go back into that company's webpage, read their press release to make sure that's happening or not. Also check and verify at FDA or even EMA or even Health Canada that those documents are there and that the review is what it says and the outcomes. And something that's helpful now is that there are some platforms that do the language translation as well. So I
Mm-hmm.
know it's historically been a challenge to find documents within the Japanese agency that are in English. But now with language model, that subset of AI tools, they can translate that to English. So that's a little more helpful now too. So there's differences where some platforms can focus on medical devices. So you can certainly go in and see precedents. And then there are ones that can focus on pharmaceutics and biologics. And again, you can go back through history to see when things change. Did, you know, did did a change in the acceptance criteria? When did it happen? Was there a new regulation, like the 21st Century Cures Act in 2016? You could go back and see and reread 21st Century Cures Act to see what it says and what the requirements are, and go along and figure out the guidance for industry from FDA to see how the FDA is interpreting that law and then how that's implemented into submissions. So you can really find that history if you don't already have it.
I mean, the thing that comes to mind when you're going through that response there was there are just so many platforms, and there's so many subscription fees, and they've all got different services. And then you add in what you said there is that you have to verify it. And so part of me goes, would it not have just been better starting from scratch and maybe looking at the original source document myself? Because when you've got 4 or 5 different models that are giving kind of similar information, but maybe its interpretation of that, then sometimes it kind of feels a bit more work than it is. And you're paying for 5 services when you truly just want an answer. And so I suppose on your side,
True.
what are the biggest limitations you've seen when using AI tools in your regulatory work?
True. Their subscription becomes a factor,
It
and
adds up.
it certainly adds up. But also, I think that's where I go into these AI platforms and let's try it out, right? Let's try it out for a year or get a demo and get a testing and done. And that way, I have been known to cancel a subscription and use something else. So as things develop, as platforms develop, use what you need based on what you need in terms of starting from scratch, going straight to the agency and looking through their website. One, they have a huge website. Just FDA and EMA themselves, a lot of the information may be buried. So that won't be helpful. Two, AI, for me, it saves time in a sense that if I want to query how many drug products have used this particular clinical outcome assessment measure that we have qualified, I want to know how many drug products have used it in the oncology field. And oncology, there's a lot of products there, and there are multiple variations of the product, just tweaked it for receptor sites and such. But AI helped me identify, narrowed it down to 10. And then at least the top 10, I can go in and dig deeper to really see, read the label. Is it really using our tool the way it was meant to be used as outlined in the context of use? If it's not, okay, 1 out of 10 is out. I still have 9 more. So I landed on 3 that I could use. So at least I can have a proof of concept to show that these 3 studies used our tool for their decisions, whether it was phase 2 or phase 3. At least it was used in their decision. And that's what our tool is meant to do. And that's how we can provide value to the industry. And that's where AI has helped me. So it takes a lot of digging, but
Yeah, it does. It is a lot of work. But if like I said, you've put the effort in to try these things and understand, is this right for the use, and you've ended up with a workflow and a system that works for you. I suppose my question in the more generalist sense following that is, how should professionals balance using AI tools while still maintaining scientific and regulatory judgment?
yes, I think if anything, for me, AI is, I view it as a helpful tool. It's not going to take over what I do, because when what I ask the external AI platform, it doesn't necessarily know what we do internally at Critical Path. So me as the human in the loop, I still need to know what's coming up, what are the pain points, what are the challenges that we have internally, and how to use AI to help me overcome those challenges, or help me help my teams overcome the challenges. So AI in itself, I don't think will be able to do that part on its own. Use it as a tool to have a faster turnaround time, because a lot of times there's several fire dumpster at the same time. So use what you can to eliminate one first. And that's me and my mentality right now. See AI as a tool, but I still have to validate and verify the output, and also kind of question the back end in terms of the data that was used to train that AI as well, because sometimes it might not be as comprehensive. And so there are new things coming out as well.
Well, I appreciate all of that, and I realise we're actually creeping towards the end of our show, and so I wanted to end on a couple of questions, maybe some quick fire, and get your sense of them. So I've got 3 questions for you. One would be, what career advice do you wish you'd received earlier in your career?
One of the things that jump out is it's okay to say I don't know, but that I will find an answer and get back to you. Right. So not that I needed to have an answer all the time, but it's okay to say I don't know.
Nice. And if we had this conversation again in 10 years' time, what do you think would have changed the most in regulatory affairs?
I am hopeful that in the next 10 years, there will be more global harmonization in terms of how regulatory and agencies and authorities are viewing a submission and a disease area and a challenge. So that's more harmonization to interpret how to do the trials and how to develop drug products for patients.
And lastly, which part of regulatory affairs do you personally enjoy the most?
To think that I'm a people person. So I enjoy meeting you years ago. I enjoy meeting other professionals who have helped me along the way. It is a relatively small community. I think so. So that when you need help and support, a pick me up and confidence just to ask a quick questions. I think it's meeting other regulatory professional people, learning about them, getting to know them, and becoming a community. That's what I enjoy most.
I really like that bit. It's something that I've quite enjoyed as well. I've been focusing solely in staffing in regulatory affairs in the US for almost 6 years now. And one thing that I found very early on was the openness to share information and actually talk about what it is they like about their job. And that's something that I'm trying to create here, trying to create something for people where they can actually share and people can interact with each other, as I feel like in today's world where we've got a lot more remote people and a lot more hybrid and much less on site, and maybe it's not as easy for people to go to network events for geographic or cost reasons. Maybe this could be something that people can actually interact with each other on these platforms. And so, with that, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join me today and sharing experiences with the regulatory voice community. It's been great to highlight your career and the area of regulatory intelligence and the role data sharing can play in the future of drug development. So, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Connor.
No problem. And if anybody else would like to be part of the show, feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions for Huong or myself, please leave them in the comments on LinkedIn and we'll try our best to respond. And following this as well, there'll be a report which basically summarizes all the aspects of this call. So thank you very much for joining me and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.